All right, let's dive in. Today we're unpacking the wild and honestly pretty unexpected story of how Brazil came to be. It's a story about exploitation, incredible resilience, and a bizarre historical accident involving Napoleon that, believe it or not, changed absolutely everything.
So, where does this story even begin? Well, it all starts not with a person or a battle, but with a tree. Yeah, a tree. When Portuguese explorers landed in South America back in 1500, they found these forests just packed with pau-brasil, a tree with this deep red heartwood that could be used to make a priceless red dye.
And get this, the name Brazil actually comes from the Portuguese word for a burning ember, brasa, because of that fiery color. In Renaissance Europe, you have to understand this color was pure luxury. And this single resource, this tree, was the entire reason the Portuguese decided this land was worth claiming. They didn't name it after a saint or a king, they named it after a product. And that really tells you everything you need to know about their initial plans. For the first few decades, this wasn't a place to build a new society. No, it was just a giant resource to be plundered. The whole identity of the place was tied directly to the Brazil wood trade. But that was just the very beginning.
You see, the real wealth, the engine that would actually build the colony and shape its very soul, well, that came from something else entirely. A brutal system that would come to define Brazil for centuries. Just look at this number for a second. It's staggering. Over 4.8 million. That's the estimated number of Africans who were forcibly brought to Brazil over nearly 400 years. To put that into perspective, Brazil was the single largest destination of the entire transatlantic slave trade. More enslaved people were brought there than to any other place in the Americas.
In this brutal system, it wasn't random. It was meticulously built to power these huge economic booms that shaped the colony. They were preferred over indigenous laborers because if they escaped, they had nowhere to run. An entire ocean separated them from their homes.
So the whole colonial economy moved in these distinct cycles. First, they nearly wiped out the Brazil wood. Then they shifted to these massive sugar plantations up in the northeast. For 2 whole centuries, sugar was like white gold. Then, boom, in the 18th century, a frantic gold and diamond rush kicked off in the southeast, and the colony's center of gravity just shifted all over again. But here's the crucial turn in the story. This narrative of exploitation is also, amazingly, a story of incredible resilience. Because out of this unimaginable suffering, the very heart of what we think of as Brazilian culture was born.
You had these two opposing worlds. Enslaved Africans lived within the brutal confines of the senzala, the slave quarters on the plantations. But many escaped, and they formed these free, self-governing communities deep in the interior, called quilombos. These were literally worlds of resistance and freedom. And these spaces, both the senzalas and the quilombos, became these incredible crucibles of culture. People didn't just survive, they created. They blended their diverse African traditions with new influences, and the results, samba, capoeira, the candomblé religion, so much of Brazil's amazing food, these weren't just pastimes. They were acts of cultural resistance that are now the absolute essence of Brazilian identity.
So while Brazil is forging this really complex identity of pain and creation, a crisis is brewing over in Europe. And it's about to change Brazil's destiny forever in one of the absolute strangest episodes in all of colonial history.
Right. Napoleon's armies are marching across Europe, and they've got their sights set on Portugal, which was a longtime ally of his #1 enemy, Britain. This put the Portuguese monarchy in a really tight spot. They had a stark choice to make. So what do? Do you stay and get captured by Napoleon? Or do you do something that no European monarch had ever done before? Well, they made a completely unprecedented decision. I'm not kidding. The entire royal court, the prince regent, the queen, thousands of nobles, administrators, all their treasures, they just packed it all up, hopped on a fleet of ships with the British Navy protecting them, and sailed right across the Atlantic.
Think about how wild that is. This move caused this sudden radical shift in power. Overnight, Rio de Janeiro goes from being just another colonial port to being the capital of the entire Portuguese empire. The colony became the center of power, and the mother country, Portugal, well, it was now just a backwater occupied by a foreign army. In this bizarre twist of fate, this is the absolute key to understanding why Brazil's path to independence was so unique. It's why it didn't just shatter into a dozen different countries like all of its Spanish-speaking neighbors did.
So, after Napoleon was defeated, the king, João VI, he eventually went back to Portugal.
But he left his son, Prince Pedro, behind as the regent. And legend has it, he gave him this incredibly practical, if maybe a little cynical advice. He basically saw the writing on the wall.
And that is exactly what happened. The moment the Portuguese parliament tried to push Brazil back into its old colonial box, Prince Pedro just refused. He declared independence and became Emperor Pedro I. The whole transition was led not by some revolutionary, but by a member of the royal family itself.
Now, if you compare this to the rest of South America, the contrast is just stark. While Spanish America was being torn apart by years of bloody, fragmented wars led by a bunch of rival generals, Brazil's transition was pretty much top-down. The power stayed centralized around a single, legitimate royal figure. And it's that continuity of power that held the vast, diverse territory of Brazil together as one single nation, while the Spanish territories shattered into all the different countries we see today.
So, when you boil it down, that's the core of Brazil's story. It's this legacy of immense cultural fusion that was born from the deepest brutality imaginable. And at the same time, it's a nation whose unity was forged not by a revolution, but by a strange, almost unbelievable accident of European history. It's a paradox that continues to shape the vibrant, complex, and incredible nation that is Brazil.